and welcome to my review of Kakegurui. It is a Netflix show that just got its second season. So, just to start off, I think the music for the series was very standard. It didn't really stand out in any way to me and was ultimately kind of forgettable. I can't really pick out a track or two that I remember very well. The animation, however, was excellent. It was often very smooth, and there were some very interesting and well-composed shots, especially during the gambling. And then the intros. The intro for both seasons, there was one for each season, was simply wonderful. They were so amazing. In the first intro, which is called Deal with the Devil, the music really brings you into that funky casino vibe, and it's almost reminiscent of Danganronpa music, actually. There are so many things to look at and so much fascinating imagery, one of which is the fish, representing the aquarium metaphor that's returned to throughout the series. Characters are each introduced in their own dramatic fashion, and garlands behind them are interwoven with cards and dice, each representing their future games. There's lots of really erotic imagery, because of course there is. The scene at the dinner table where our male protagonist is on the menu is a clever allusion to how it's a cutthroat world and how he's quote-unquote being eaten alive. But our main female character also cuts his tie, which could be an allusion to him cutting ties to the systems that the school has. The president and our main girl character engage in a wild dance, alluding to their showdown at the end of season 1. Overall, super fascinating and full of so many interesting details. Every time I watch it, I pick up on something new. It's just so much fun. I believe the second opening is called XX. The music for that one isn't quite as engaging, and the intro as a whole isn't quite as engaging as the first, but it's still not bad. It's still really well drawn and well composed. Again, many characters are shown with cards or chips or whatever, money, that calls back to their previous games in the first season. There's also a lot of references to the suits of cards, but I can't really distinguish a pattern that's supposed to be, representing something with these suits. The only thing I could really think of is that our main female protagonist is represented with an ace, so that she's an ace of gambling. But the other characters aren't really represented like that at all. This intro is more solely focused on our female protagonist, but there are allusions to team-ups that happen later in the season and new characters introduced. It just doesn't quite have the same interesting analytical symbolism as the other, and there's some very awkward lip-syncing going on for quite a bit of the intro. It might be more impactful if I spoke Japanese or knew what they were saying, but it's just kind of a weird thing to be so central in the intro. It's full of fun transitions and compositions though, so it's still overall pretty good. Now, getting into the story. The story starts out strong but gradually gets weaker. It takes place at Hayakao Private Academy. I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's the home to the children of many very important people, like heads of state, heads of very large businesses, and the school is dominated by gambling because there are many aspects of gambling that would make them successful in their future careers. Here we meet our very boring, very standard male protagonist, Ryota. But the story revolves around a different transfer student, Yumeko. Yumeko is a compulsive gambler, and she happens to be amazing at it. Therefore, the student council decides to take her down. This is where one of our issues arises. There seems to be absolutely no authority at this school. The student council controls everything. There seems to be no teachers, administrators, or principal. This on its own isn't necessarily bad. Removing adults from a story about younger people is a way to allow younger characters to learn and grow while making mistakes that an adult wouldn't allow. That's why a lot of stories tend to kill parents. But this becomes a problem when the students are in danger. And unfortunately, that brings me to the house pet system. The student council receives monthly donations from the student body of 3,000, and the bottom 100 become house pets. They wear identifying tags and become less than human. Male students become Fidos, and female students become Mittens. Ryota starts the story out as a house pet. This on its own isn't bad. House pets are treated poorly, but I don't hate that, because it establishes major stakes for losing and creates a hierarchy at the school. And further, when Yumeko begins winning bets as a house pet, but refuses to pay back her debts, she creates a feeling of hope. And the idea of a house pet revolt is suggested, which would be cool. Seriously, a story about Yumeko using gambling to raise the house pets to rebellion would be an amazing story. That doesn't happen though, unfortunately, and I do have a huge problem with the house pet system. It is outright stated that male students can sexually assault female house pets with no repercussions. And I don't even want to talk about that anymore. It's so disturbing. So we'll move on. Let's talk about characterization. Yumeko is initially a very likable character. In her first gamble at the school, she takes down Mary, a queen bee who has been very cruel to our generic male protag, and was cheating in matches to win. Yumeko uses some of her winnings to free Ryota from his debt. She remains likable through her first challenge with a student council member, Yoriko. She's the head of the Traditional Culture and Research Club, and she's also cheating to increase her odds of winning. Yumeko exposes her, but loses a massive amount of money and becomes a house pet. And here's where another problem peeks out. From this point forward, Yumeko never loses a single high-stakes gambling match, which removes the tension from any future matches that she has. It's not just that she's an amazing gambler, but she's also amazingly lucky. She'll often say that decisions she's made are, quote-unquote, just a gamble, but she's always right about those gambles. Always. She never makes a mistake. Then comes the part about the really weird, overt sexual undertones. It feels weird to even call them undertones when they're so blatant. Midori is the school's beautification officer, and I literally hate her as a character. Anytime she was on screen, I was incredibly uncomfortable. She takes extreme pleasure in the risk of gambling, but money means nothing to her, so instead she gambles life and limb. It's really creepy, kind of indescribable. Yumeko is not that bad, thankfully, but she does grab her chest and the hem of her skirt when she's gambling, grabs other characters suggestively, and says, and I quote, "Let's get our gambling freak on," which is just so weird every time. Whatever, she's 17 or whatever, at least she's not doing this in front of, like, kids. Oh wait, yes she is. I don't know what Mushubami's actual age is, but she's referred to as a grade schooler. And Yumeko and Midori act this way in front of her. But again, whatever. The pervy stuff is weird, but ultimately a small part of her characterization. What takes her from a slightly pervy, risk-taking, compulsive gambler to a bad person is an episode in Season 2, where Sayaka, the student council secretary, challenges Yumeko to a gamble to earn the respect of the president. The forfeit is either Sayaka must give up any interaction with the president, or Yumeko has to give up gambling. Partway through the tower game, which is BS and not as clever as the show thinks it is, the stakes change, and suddenly the loser will have to throw herself from the top of the 5-story tower to her death. Wanna know what the big secret of the tower is? It rotates. It's very obvious, extremely so. But anyway, Sayaka loses, of course. She resigns herself, chooses an outside door on the tower, of which there are, I think, 6, and throws herself off of it, and lands on a crash mat. The president jumps too and tells her that if she had chosen any other door, she would have died, but the prez knew she would pick this one because she's a rational girl, and the answer was 5, like there are 5 stories of the tower. It isn't really made clear whether Yumeko knew about the crash pad or not. I don't think she would've, because that ruins the stakes of the bet. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. She bet her and someone else's life, felt no guilt watching her fall from the tower, and felt no remorse for torturing this poor girl who wanted nothing but to impress her boss. Her selfishness is incredible. She bet Sumeragi's life and her balance against Manyuta too. And on the topic of Sumeragi, it's very hard to like her. Mary was toppled and redeemed. Sumeragi was toppled and redeemed. But every time she did something nice, in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, this freshman removed people's real, actual fingernails in bets. Overall, she ended up likable, but I would certainly never trust her. Yumeko gets less likable as time goes on, Mary gets better and better, actually, and Ryota, our audience stand-in, stops getting dragged around as much in Season 2, and was ultimately mostly forgotten, but I hardly care because he was about as interesting as a blade of grass. Season 2 in general was not bad. The premise was actually very interesting. The student council president decides to give up her seat as student council president of the school, as well as head of a group of families called the Bami clan. She decides to make the election about gambling and gives everyone one poker chip that can be used and exchanged in gambles. And using the poker chips maintains the gambling nature of the school. It's actually really interesting and a great connection. The twist at the end of Season 2 was pretty good to an extent. It certainly surprised me, and connecting Yumeko to the Bami clan was expected, but still interesting. Again, Yumeko wins, destroying Batsubami's chance of freeing herself from slavery, but I wasn't rooting for Yumeko, so her win wasn't very satisfying. By far the best episode of Season 2 was the actress versus idol performing arts bet. It raised the idea of surpassing your heroes and how difficult that can be. How you might be sacrificing for your dream, but not sacrificing the right things or in the right way. I think that using the idea of gambling as a metaphor for other aspects of life is criminally underused in favor of a Yumeko power fantasy. Questions like rationality versus instinct, greater good versus moral right, ultimate power versus nothing to lose. But while these themes are briefly suggested, they're never expanded on in a meaningful way. Where some of these points could have been made stronger by Yumeko losing, she doesn't. Instead of a series about both characters growing through their love of gambling, opponents learning that gambling is risk, and you have more spirit without cheating, and Yumeko would learn empathy, and that sometimes it's better to lose than to take everything from someone. This is sacrificed for gambling is fun if you always win in a dramatic fashion and absolutely destroy your opponents. Overall, 5.5 poker chips out of 10. Thanks for watching, and have a lovely day and all that jazz.